The clock had just struck 7 a.m. when I pulled myself out of bed on December 1st, my mind already racing with lists and timelines. Christmas was coming, and this year I was determined to make it perfect. My name is Jessica Thompson, and at 54 I've learned that family gatherings are battlefields disguised as celebrations, especially when your mother-in-law is Martha Williamson. "You're up early," my husband David mumbled from beneath the covers as I slipped into my robe. "Planning," I whispered back, not wanting to fully disturb him. "Your mother confirmed yesterday. The whole family will be here for Christmas Eve dinner." I didn't tell him about the knot that formed in my stomach when Martha texted her confirmation. After 15 years of marriage, I still couldn't shake the feeling that nothing I ever did was quite good enough for the Williamson matriarch. But this year would be different. This year I would create a Christmas dinner so magnificent that even Martha would have to acknowledge my efforts. The following weeks became a blur of Pinterest boards, specialty grocery store runs, and late nights practicing recipes I'd never attempted before. I ordered handcrafted napkin holders from an artisan I found online, spent a small fortune on fine china that matched the holiday theme I'd selected, and even hired a professional to help with the more elaborate decorations. "Jess, don't you think you're going a bit overboard?" David asked one evening, finding me at the dining table surrounded by seating charts and menu options. "I just want everything to be perfect," I replied, not looking up from my work. "Your mother appreciates quality and attention to detail." David sighed, placing his hands on my shoulders. "My mother is impossible to please, you know that." But I didn't want to hear it. Somewhere deep inside me lived a foolish hope that with enough effort, enough perfection, I could finally earn Martha's approval. So I continued my crusade, spending nearly every free moment of December preparing for that one evening. By Christmas Eve morning, our home looked like something out of a magazine spread. Twinkling lights cascaded from every appropriate surface. The tree was decorated with ornaments that told the Williamson family history, and the dining table was a masterpiece of festive elegance. The menu I had planned was ambitious. A heritage turkey with cranberry orange glaze, roasted root vegetables with herbs from my garden, homemade rolls that had required 3 attempts to perfect, and a show-stopping Yule log cake that had taken me an entire day to create. "It's beautiful, Jess," David said, genuine amazement in his voice as he surveyed our transformed home. "You've outdone yourself." His approval should have been enough, but as I heard car doors slamming outside, I found myself smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my carefully selected dress, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Martha entered first, her critical eye immediately scanning every corner of our home. Behind her came David's sister Emily and her husband, followed by his brother Michael with his wife and children. The house quickly filled with voices and movement, but I remained hyper-aware of Martha's every reaction. "The decorations are certainly elaborate," she commented, running a finger along a garland I had hand-strung with dried orange slices and cinnamon sticks. I forced a smile. I wanted to make it special. Dinner was served precisely at 7 p.m. as planned. I'd spent hours setting the table, positioning each element with surgical precision. The family gathered, exclaiming over the spread before them, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel a flicker of pride. That's when it happened. Martha took her seat at the table, looked around at the feast I had prepared, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "All this fuss. I would have preferred a real restaurant." The table fell silent. I felt my cheeks burn as I stared down at my plate, the turkey I had spent hours basting and monitoring suddenly looking pathetic and amateur. 15 years of trying to please this woman, weeks of preparation for this specific night, and she had dismissed it all in a single sentence. What hurt the most in that moment wasn't Martha's criticism. I had grown accustomed to that over the years. It was the silence that followed. David, my husband of 15 years, said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't acknowledge the weeks of effort I had poured into this evening. He simply reached for the mashed potatoes and asked his brother to pass the gravy, as if his mother hadn't just publicly humiliated me in my own home. I made it through dinner on autopilot, serving courses, refilling glasses, and making empty conversation while something hardened inside me. As I served the Yule log cake I had spent hours perfecting, watching Martha take a tiny, disapproving bite, I realized with startling clarity that no amount of effort would ever be enough. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the kitchen was clean, no thanks to anyone but me, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by the remnants of my perfect Christmas. David had gone to bed, exhausted from what he called family overload, apparently oblivious to the wound that was still bleeding inside me. "I would have preferred a real restaurant," I whispered to myself, Martha's words echoing in the empty room. 20 years of marriage, 15 Christmas dinners, countless family gatherings where I had bent over backward to accommodate the Williamson family traditions, preferences and criticisms. For what? As I sat there in the glow of the Christmas lights I had so carefully arranged, I made a decision. This would be the last Christmas I sacrificed my sanity, my time, and my self-respect on the altar of Martha Williamson's approval. Something had to change, and since no one else seemed inclined to address the elephant in the room, it would have to be me. What Martha and the rest of the Williamson family didn't know was that this perfect hostess had a breaking point, and they had just found it. I didn't sleep that night. While David snored peacefully beside me, I lay awake replaying Martha's words and the family's reaction, or rather, their lack of reaction. By morning, my hurt had crystallized into something harder, sharper. I was done being the family doormat. "Sleep well?" David asked as he rolled over, reaching for me. I moved away slightly. Not really. "Mum can be a piece of work, can't she?" He chuckled as if we were sharing some light-hearted joke. I sat up then, turning to face him. "Your mother publicly humiliated me after I spent weeks preparing for yesterday. And you said nothing." The casual smile dropped from his face. "Come on, Jess, you know how she is. Getting upset just gives her what she wants. And what about what I want, David? What about the respect I deserve in my own home?" He sighed, that familiar sigh, the one that said this conversation was tiresome to him. "It's Christmas morning. Can we not do this now?" That was the moment something snapped inside me. 20 years of swallowing my feelings, of making excuses for the Williamsons' behavior, of telling myself that family peace was worth my dignity, it all came crashing down. When would be a good time, David? After another holiday where I kill myself to meet impossible standards? Or perhaps next Christmas, when your mother finds some new way to belittle me? My voice was steady, which seemed to surprise him more than if I had shouted. He sat up, suddenly alert. "You're really upset about this?" "Yes, David, I'm really upset." I got out of bed and reached for my robe, and I'm done pretending otherwise. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. We went through the motions of the holidays, exchanging gifts, calling friends, eating leftovers from the feast that apparently wasn't good enough for a real restaurant. David watched me cautiously, as if waiting for me to either explode or return to normal. I did neither. Instead, I began to take inventory, not of the Christmas decorations that needed to be packed away or the new gifts that needed homes, but of myself. How had I become this person who measured her worth by the approval of a woman who seemed incapable of giving it? When had I decided that my role in this family was to absorb criticism without complaint? On December 28th, I called my old friend Diane, who I had neglected over the years because Martha found her too outspoken. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, away from any prying Williamson eyes. "You look terrible," Diane said bluntly, as she slid into the booth across from me. I laughed, a real laugh that surprised me with its authenticity. "Thanks. It's been a rough Christmas." I told her everything, not just about the disastrous dinner, but about the 15 years of trying to be good enough for the Williamson clan. Diane listened, her expression growing increasingly incredulous. "And you've put up with this because she finally asked. "Because I love David. Because I thought keeping peace in the family was my responsibility. Because I'm an idiot." I shrugged, stirring my coffee absently. "The first reason is valid. The other two are bullshit," Diane said. "Jess, you're one of the smartest, most capable women I know. You ran your own successful business before you married David. You raised 2 amazing kids who are now thriving in college. Why are you letting this woman determine your self-worth?" Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. "Why indeed? What would you do?" I asked her. Diane's eyes gleamed. "I'd stop playing a rigged game. Martha's never going to approve of you because she doesn't want to. It's not about your cooking or your decorating or anything you actually do. It's about her need to be the most important woman in her son's life." I let that sink in. "So I just give up, let her win?" "No." Diane leaned forward. "You change the rules. Stop seeking her approval and start demanding her respect. Or at the very least, stop inviting abuse into your home." That evening, I sat David down after dinner. "We need to talk about your mother." He tensed immediately. "Jess, can't we just move past this? Christmas is over. Until next Christmas. And every family gathering between now and then." I took a deep breath. "I've been reflecting on why your mother's comment hurt me so much. It's not just what she said. It's that it was the culmination of 15 years of criticism and passive-aggressive comments that you and your family have normalized. David started to protest, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. I've spent years trying to win your mother's approval, and I finally realized it's not available to me. That's her issue, not mine. But what is my issue is how I respond to it going forward. What does that mean? David asked warily. It means I'm done hosting holidays where I'm not respected. It means I'm done pretending your mother's behavior is acceptable. It means things need to change. To my surprise, instead of becoming defensive, David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I never expected. You're right. I blinked, certain I had misheard him. Mom has always been hard on you, and I've never really stood up to her about it. I guess it was easier to expect you to absorb it than to confront her. The admission should have felt vindicating, but instead I felt a wave of sadness. How much unnecessary pain could have been avoided if we'd had this conversation years ago? So what now? He asked. Now we set boundaries together. I reached for his hand. I don't want to cut your mother out of our lives, but I won't be her emotional punching bag anymore. We stayed up late that night, talking more openly than we had in years. David shared stories of growing up with Martha's impossible standards, how his father had often played peacemaker until he passed away 10 years ago, how since then, Martha's critical nature had only intensified, particularly toward the women in her sons' lives. Emily's husband hardly ever brings her to family functions anymore, he admitted, referring to his sister. I never really thought about why. As January arrived, bringing with it the promise of a new year, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time when thinking about the Williamson family. Hope. Not hope that Martha would suddenly transform into the warm, loving mother-in-law I had always wanted, but hope that I could transform my response to her. With David's support, I drafted an email to Martha. It was respectful but clear. Her comment at Christmas dinner had been hurtful and inappropriate. In the future, we expected that guests in our home would treat us with the same courtesy we extended to them. Martha's response came within hours. It was exactly what I expected, a masterclass in deflection and victimhood. She was sorry if I had misunderstood her comment, which was only meant as a compliment to my abilities, and that she was deeply hurt that I would imply she was anything but supportive. The old me would have immediately backtracked, apologized for causing offense, and redoubled my efforts to please her. The new me simply forwarded the email to David with a single question. What do you think? His reply made me smile for the first time in days. I think Mom just showed her hand, and I think it's time I had a talk with her. True to his word, David arranged to meet his mother for lunch the following week. I offered to go with him, but he insisted this was a conversation he needed to have alone. This is long overdue, he said as he grabbed his keys. I should have done this years ago. I spent those hours pacing our home, alternating between pride in my husband's newfound backbone and anxiety about Martha's reaction. The Williamson family operated on a careful ecosystem of avoidance and appeasement when it came to Martha's behavior. David's confrontation would upset that delicate balance. When he finally returned, his expression was unreadable. How did it go? I asked tentatively. He sank onto the couch, looking drained but somehow lighter. About as well as could be expected. She cried, she accused me of choosing you over family. She brought up every sacrifice she ever made for me. My heart sank. David, I never wanted to come between... No, he interrupted firmly. That's exactly her playbook, Jess. Make me feel guilty for having reasonable boundaries. Make you the villain. I see it now. He ran his hands through his hair. Do you know what she said when I reminded her about the restaurant comment? She said she was doing me a favor by helping you improve. As if humiliating my wife at Christmas dinner was some kind of constructive criticism. I sat beside him processing this. What happens now? I told her she has a choice. She can respect our boundaries and treat you with genuine courtesy, or she can see a lot less of us. Balls in her court. For the next month, silence from Martha. She didn't call on David's birthday, didn't send her usual texts asking for tech support or rides to appointments. The rest of the family chose sides predictably. Michael, always his mother's son, stopped returning our calls. Emily surprisingly reached out. Can we meet for coffee? Her text read, just us sisters-in-law? We met at the same cafe where I'd had my revelation with Diane. Emily looked nervous, fidgeting with her cup. I heard about what happened at Christmas, she began, and David's conversation with Mom. I tensed, preparing for accusations. Instead, Emily's next words stunned me. Thank you, she said softly, for having the courage to do what I never could. Over the next hour, Emily shared her own history with Martha, the criticism of her parenting, the backhanded compliments about her home and appearance, the constant comparison to Michael's perfect wife, who Emily revealed was currently in therapy largely due to Martha's treatment. "We've all just accepted it," Emily said, shaking her head. "Dad used to buffer her worst tendencies, but since he died, why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. Her smile was sad. "Family loyalty? Fear? It was easier to endure it a few times a year than cause a scene. But watching what happened to you at Christmas, seeing how David finally stood up to her, it made me realize we've all been enabling her." That conversation with Emily became the first of many. Gradually, a new alliance formed within the Williamson family, not against Martha, but in favor of healthier relationships. Even Michael's wife reached out cautiously, though Michael himself remained firmly in his mother's camp. February brought the first thaw, a text from Martha to David. "Your sister tells me I may have been too harsh at Christmas. Perhaps we could discuss this in person." David showed me the message, eyebrows raised. "Progress?" I shrugged. "Maybe. Or a tactical retreat." The meeting was set for neutral territory. A restaurant, the irony wasn't lost on me. This time I insisted on being present. Martha looked older somehow, smaller in the booth of the upscale Italian place she had selected. She was perfectly put together as always. Not a hair out of place, tasteful jewelry, elegant sweater, but there was a brittleness to her I hadn't noticed before. "Jessica, David." Her nod was stiff, but not openly hostile. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." The conversation that followed was awkward, stilted, but civil. Martha never quite managed a direct apology, but she did acknowledge that her words might have been misinterpreted and that she valued family harmony. It wasn't the sweeping mea culpa I might have fantasized about, but coming from Martha Williamson, it was practically self-flagellation. As winter melted into spring, a new pattern emerged. Martha's barbs didn't disappear entirely, but they were muted, less frequent. More importantly, when they did occur, David would gently but firmly call them out. "Mom, that comment wasn't necessary," or "let's try that again with respect." The first time he did this at a family dinner, the table fell silent in shock. Martha flushed crimson, her fork suspended mid-air. Then, remarkably, she nodded and rephrased her criticism as a neutral observation. My relationship with Martha would never be warm, too much water under that particular bridge, but it was evolving into something I could live with. Mutual respect, if not affection. Then came the invitation that tested our new boundaries. "I'd like to host Easter this year," Martha announced during a family brunch in late March. The entire family together again. It's been too long. The old me would have immediately rearranged our plans to accommodate her. The new me exchanged a look with David. "We'll have to check our calendar, Mom," he said smoothly. "We might have made other plans." Martha's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Family should be together for holidays, David." "We agree," I interjected, my voice calm. "But we're also building traditions with friends. Let us discuss and get back to you." In the car afterward, David let out a long breath. "Did you see her face? She's planning something." I nodded. "The question is, do we go and maintain our boundaries, or decline and avoid potential drama?" We debated for days. Diane advised staying away. "It's a trap." Emily thought we should go. She's actually trying in her way. In the end, we decided to accept with clear conditions. We would attend for the meal only, not the entire day, and at the first sign of old patterns, we would calmly leave. Easter Sunday dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully, polished but not trying too hard, and prepared the dish I'd been asked to bring with professional precision, but without the desperate need to impress that had driven my Christmas efforts. "Ready for this?" David asked as we pulled into his mother's driveway. I took his hand. "Ready as I'll ever be." Martha's home was impeccable as always, decorated for spring with tasteful floral arrangements and pastel touches. The entire Williamson clan was there, watching us with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. "Jessica, David." Martha greeted us at the door, accepting my dish with a nod. "Thank you for coming and for bringing." She peered at my offering. "Deviled eggs." How traditional. I felt David tense beside me, but I simply smiled. Sometimes classics are classics for a reason. Happy Easter, Martha. We moved through the gathering, catching up with family members we hadn't seen since the Christmas debacle. Some were openly friendly, others cautiously polite. Michael remained distant, but his wife sought me out when he was occupied elsewhere. "Emily told me what happened," she whispered, "about you standing up to Martha. I wish I had your courage." Before I could respond, Martha's voice rang out, calling everyone to the dining room. The table was a showcase of Martha's entertaining skills: fine china, crystal glasses, elaborate centerpieces. For a moment I felt a twinge of inadequacy, the old reflex to compare and find myself wanting. But then I caught David's eye across the table. He winked at me, a small gesture of solidarity that dissolved the knot in my chest. This wasn't a competition anymore. I didn't need to prove anything. Dinner progressed with surprising pleasantness. Martha was playing the gracious hostess to perfection, and the conversation flowed easily around safe topics. The children's activities, upcoming travel plans, a new restaurant downtown. Then came the moment. "Jessica," Martha said during a lull, her voice carrying clearly across the table, "I've been meaning to ask you something." I felt every muscle in my body tense. "Yes, Martha?" She took a deliberate sip of her wine before continuing. "I've been reflecting on our Christmas dinner at your home." The table went silent. I could feel every eye on us, the collective breath being held. "I believe I owe you an apology." Had I heard correctly? Martha Williamson, the woman who had spent 15 years subtly undermining me at every opportunity, was apologizing. The silence around the table deepened as everyone processed this unprecedented event. "I spoke thoughtlessly," Martha continued, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Your dinner was beautifully prepared, and my comment was unkind." I searched her face for signs of insincerity or manipulation, but found only a carefully composed expression that revealed little. Was this genuine remorse, or simply a tactical move to regain control of the family dynamics? "Thank you, Martha," I replied evenly. "I appreciate that." She nodded once, decisively, as if checking off an unpleasant task from her list. "Well then, shall we have dessert?" And just like that, the moment passed. Conversation gradually resumed, as Martha disappeared into the kitchen to retrieve her famous lemon tart. David squeezed my hand under the table, his expression a mix of shock and cautious optimism. "Did that just happen?" he whispered. "I think so," I murmured back, "but I'm not sure what it means." The rest of the Easter gathering passed without incident. Martha remained polite if somewhat distant, and I found myself in the novel position of not constantly bracing for the next subtle dig or backhanded compliment. When we left, her goodbye was cordial, her cheek kiss perfunctory but not cold. In the car heading home, David let out a long, low whistle. 15 years of marriage, and my mother apologizes to you. I feel like I should check if pigs are flying." I laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Do you think she meant it? With Mom? Who knows?" He shrugged. "But she said it publicly in front of the entire family. That counts for something." Indeed, it did. In the weeks that followed, the family grapevine hummed with this development. Emily called me the very next day. "I've never, and I mean never, heard Mom apologize to anyone," she marveled. "What did you do to her?" "Set boundaries," I replied simply, "and had a husband who finally supported them." Even Michael's frigid attitude began to thaw slightly. He called David about a work matter, and for the first time in months, their conversation extended beyond the strictly necessary. Progress was incremental, but real. May brought Mother's Day, another potential minefield. In previous years, we'd always spent the day with Martha, regardless of any other plans I might have preferred. This year, David and I had decided to split the day, brunch with my mother, dinner with his. When we communicated this plan to Martha, I steeled myself for resistance. To my surprise, she accepted the arrangement without complaint. "That seems fair," she said, and requested we make the reservation at a new French bistro she'd been wanting to try. The Mother's Day dinner was pleasant, not warm, not particularly intimate, but pleasant. Martha was on her best behavior, asking genuine questions about my work and listening to the answers. She even brought a small gift, a cookbook from a chef I had once mentioned admiring. "I thought you might enjoy this," she said, passing the elegantly wrapped package across the table, "since you're such an accomplished cook." No sarcasm, no hidden barb, just a straightforward compliment. David looked as stunned as I felt. "That's very thoughtful, Mom." As spring deepened into summer, this new normal continued to evolve. We saw Martha regularly, but not excessively. Our interactions remained largely cordial. Occasionally, her critical nature would surface, but it was muted now, less targeted. And when it did appear, David remained consistent in his gentle corrections. Then came the invitation that would truly test the waters of our reformed relationship. "I've been thinking," Martha announced during a family barbecue at Michael's in July. "It's been years since we've taken a family vacation together. I'd like to rent a beach house for a week in August, all of us together. A week with Martha in close quarters, with no escape? I felt my anxiety spike instantly. That sounds ambitious, David said carefully. Martha waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense. We used to do it every summer when you children were young. I miss those times. We all have busy schedules now, Mom, Emily pointed out. Work commitments, the children's activities. I've already checked the availability at that lovely place on Cape Cod we used to rent. The last week of August is open. I'll cover the cost. My treat to my family. Martha's tone made it clear this wasn't so much an invitation as an expectation. The old patterns were reasserting themselves, albeit in a more benevolent guise. Martha deciding what was best for everyone, Martha overriding concerns with largesse, Martha orchestrating family togetherness on her terms. On the drive home, David and I debated our options. It's a generous offer, he said, playing devil's advocate, and she is trying in her way. A week is a long time, I countered, and trying doesn't mean she's changed fundamentally. We went back and forth, weighing the potential benefits against the risks. A chance for real healing versus a regression to old dynamics. Family unity versus our hard-won boundaries. That night, I called Diane for her perspective. A whole week with the Dragon Lady? She laughed. Are you masochistic? She's been different lately, I admitted. Less critical, more respectful. People don't change overnight, Jess. Especially not someone who spent 7 decades perfecting her particular brand of passive-aggressive control. So you think it's a trap? Diane sighed. I think it's a risk. The question is whether you're willing to take it. After much deliberation, David and I decided on a compromise. We would join the family vacation, but only for 4 days instead of the full week. We'd have our own car, giving us the freedom to create space if needed. And most importantly, we agreed on a code word, hydrangeas, that either of us could use if Martha's behavior crossed a line, signaling that it was time to step away temporarily. When we communicated our decision to Martha, her response was mixed. 4 days is better than nothing, I suppose, she sniffed, though I don't understand why you can't commit to the full family experience. Mom, David said firmly, this is what works for us. We're happy to be included for the time we can manage. She accepted this with minimal additional guilt-tripping, which itself felt like progress. As August approached, my anxiety about the trip waxed and waned. One day I'd feel optimistic about this new chapter in our family dynamics. The next, I'd be convinced we were walking into an emotional ambush. David remained steady, reminding me that we had tools now that we hadn't possessed before. Clear boundaries, united expectations, and the willingness to enforce them. The beach house Martha had rented was exactly as advertised. Spacious, beautifully appointed, with stunning ocean views. Each family unit had their own bedroom suite, providing at least some privacy. Martha, naturally, had claimed the master suite with its private balcony and panoramic vista. The first evening set the tone. Martha had arranged a welcome dinner, catered by a local restaurant. As we gathered around the massive dining table, she raised her wine glass in a toast. To family, she said, her gaze moving around the table. There's nothing more important. We all echoed the sentiment, clinking glasses. The dinner that followed was surprisingly relaxed. Martha seemed content to let conversation flow naturally, rather than directing it as she typically would. When she did interject, her comments were mostly benign observations or questions, rather than veiled criticisms. Later, as David and I prepared for bed in our suite, he seemed almost giddy. Did you see that? She barely made a single passive-aggressive comment all evening. I was more cautious. It's only the first night. Let's see how the week unfolds. The next morning brought our first minor test. Martha had arranged a family breakfast, complete with a detailed menu she'd planned in advance. Jessica, would you mind preparing the eggs? You have such a knack for getting them just right, she said, in what seemed like a genuine compliment. Actually, Martha, I replied calmly, David and I were thinking of taking a walk on the beach first. We'll grab something when we get back. A brief flash of annoyance crossed her face. How dare we deviate from her carefully orchestrated family bonding? But she recovered quickly. Of course, she said with a tight smile. Enjoy your walk. That morning walk became our daily ritual during the vacation, a quiet time for just David and me before rejoining the family dynamics. Sometimes we'd talk about the previous day's interactions, analyzing Martha's behavior and our responses. Other times we'd simply walk in companionable silence, listening to the waves and gathering our strength for whatever the day might bring. On our third day at the beach house, a revealing incident occurred. Martha had planned a family photo session with a professional photographer she'd hired at considerable expense, as she repeatedly reminded us. Everyone was instructed to wear coordinating outfits in shades of blue and white. "Jessica," Martha called as we assembled on the deck for the photos, "perhaps you could step to the back row. Your height might overshadow Emily otherwise." It was classic Martha, a direction disguised as concern, a subtle reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. In the past, I would have silently complied, swallowing any hurt to keep the peace. Not this time. "Actually, Martha," I said pleasantly but firmly, "I think the photographer should decide how to arrange us for the best composition. That's what we're paying for after all." The silence that followed was electric. The family froze, eyes darting between Martha and me, waiting for the explosion. But instead of the sharp retort I half expected, Martha seemed to catch herself, a peculiar expression crossing her face. "You're absolutely right," she said after a moment, her voice oddly strained. "Antoine, please arrange us as you see fit." The photographer, oblivious to the undercurrents, cheerfully directed us into position, with me, as it happened, right in the front row next to David. That evening, after dinner, Martha asked me to join her for a glass of wine on her private balcony. I exchanged a glance with David, who raised his eyebrows in silent question. I nodded reassuringly. I could handle whatever this was. The sunset was painting the sky in dramatic pinks and golds as we settled into the comfortable chairs overlooking the ocean. Martha was silent for a long moment, swirling her wine contemplatively. "You've changed," she finally said, her tone neutral, observational. I took a careful sip before responding. "I have. You stand up for yourself now." Another statement, not quite a criticism. "I do." Martha turned to face me directly, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I haven't made it easy for you, have I? Being part of this family." The understatement was so profound I nearly laughed. Instead, I opted for honesty. "No, Martha, you haven't." She nodded slowly, returning her gaze to the horizon. "David is a lot like his father, you know. Robert was always the peacemaker, always smoothing things over, telling me when I was being too harsh, but privately never challenging me openly." This glimpse into her marriage was unexpected. In 15 years, Martha had rarely spoken of her late husband, except to reference his professional accomplishments or stoic character. "When he died," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, "I felt unmoored. The person who had always been my balance was gone, and perhaps she paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Perhaps I transferred some of that need for opposition, for balance, onto you." I remained silent, stunned by this unprecedented self-reflection. "That Christmas dinner," Martha said, turning to face me again. "When I made that comment about preferring a restaurant, I tensed involuntarily. I said it because everything was so perfect." Her admission hung in the air between us. "Your home, the decorations, the food, all of it was flawless, and I felt obsolete." "Obsolete?" I echoed, confused. Martha's smile was thin, fragile. "For decades, I was the family matriarch, the one who hosted perfect holidays, who set the standards, who maintained the Williamson traditions. And then there you were, doing it all so effortlessly, making it look easy in a way I never could. The children clearly enjoying themselves more at your home than they ever had at mine." She trailed off, taking a large sip of wine before continuing. "I wanted to find fault, needed to find fault really, to prove to myself that I was still necessary." The revelation left me momentarily speechless. All these years I had attributed Martha's criticism to disapproval, to some fundamental belief that I wasn't good enough for her son. The possibility that it stemmed from her own insecurity had never occurred to me. "Martha," I said carefully, "I never intended to replace you or diminish your role in the family. I know that, intellectually at least." She sighed deeply. "After your confrontation, after David finally stood up to me, I did some thinking, and some therapy, if you can believe it, at my age." This admission was perhaps the most surprising of all. Martha Williamson seeing a therapist, the woman who considered self-help books crutches for the weak-minded. Dr. Levine suggested I might be projecting my fears of irrelevance onto you, that my behavior was less about your inadequacies and more about my unwillingness to accept a changing role in the family as my children established their own homes and traditions. I wasn't sure how to respond. This vulnerability from Martha felt almost like a trap, yet her expression held none of the calculation I was accustomed to seeing. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued, preempting whatever I might have said. "I'm simply explaining. and perhaps apologizing in my way. She glanced at me sidelong. I'm not very good at apologies. Another thing Dr. Levine says I need to work on. Despite everything, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. Apologies do take practice. A soft laugh escaped her. Indeed, she refilled our glasses, her movements more relaxed now. You know, in some ways, you remind me of myself at your age. The determination, the attention to detail. Though you're warmer with the children than I ever managed to be. Coming from Martha, this was high praise indeed. David is happier with you than I've ever seen him, she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. Stronger too, standing up to me like that. His father would have been proud. We talked for nearly 2 hours as the sky darkened and stars appeared over the ocean. Not about everything. Decades of complicated dynamics couldn't be resolved in a single conversation, but enough to establish a new understanding. Martha shared stories of her early years with Robert, the challenges of raising 3 children while maintaining the social standing she'd been raised to value above all. I spoke of my own insecurities as I entered the Williamson family, my desire to be accepted, the years of trying to earn approval that seemed perpetually withheld. As our conversation wound down, Martha set her empty glass on the side table with a decisive click. I can't promise to change overnight, she said frankly. Old habits, as they say, but I am trying, Jessica, and I would. Appreciate your patience as I learn to be a different kind of mother-in-law. A better one, hopefully. I can work with trying, I replied, equally honest, and I appreciate the effort it takes. When I returned to our suite, David was waiting anxiously. What happened? You were gone for hours. Do I need to have another talk with her? I smiled, settling beside him on the bed. Actually, your mother and I had quite an illuminating conversation. His eyebrows shot up. Do tell. As I recounted the evening's revelations, David's expression morphed from skepticism to astonishment. Therapy, he repeated incredulously. My mother is seeing a therapist. Voluntarily. Apparently so. He shook his head in wonder. I never thought I'd see the day. People can surprise you, I said, thinking of the vulnerable woman I'd glimpsed beneath Martha's carefully maintained facade, even at 72. Our final day at the beach house was remarkably pleasant. Martha remained true to her word, not transformed into a doting mother-in-law overnight, but noticeably more restrained in her commentary and quicker to catch herself when old patterns emerged. When we departed, her goodbye was warmer than I could ever remember, her hug lingering a moment longer than usual. Thank you for coming, she said, and I sensed she meant more than just the vacation. Thank you for having us, I replied, equally layered. As we drove away, David reached over to take my hand. So, Christmas at our place again this year? I laughed, a free and genuine sound. Maybe we should try a restaurant. I hear they're quite nice for holidays. The months following our beach vacation brought subtle but meaningful changes to our family dynamic. Martha's birthday in September offered the first opportunity to test our newfound understanding. In previous years, her birthday celebration had been an elaborate affair, meticulously planned by her and executed by the family according to her exacting standards. This year, when Martha announced she'd like a simple family dinner at her home, I found myself volunteering to help with the preparations. David looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. Are you sure? He asked when we were alone. You and Mom in the kitchen together sounds like a recipe for disaster. I think it'll be fine, I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Consider it an experiment. The day of Martha's birthday, I arrived at her home armed with a bottle of her favorite wine and a sense of cautious optimism. When she answered the door, I noticed she'd had her hair styled differently, softer, less severe than her usual perfect coif. Jessica, thank you for coming early. Her greeting was cordial, not effusive, but the subtle warmth was noticeable. I thought we might prepare the appetizers together. The kitchen had always been Martha's domain, her sanctuary, where everything had its precise place and function. As we worked side by side, I braced myself for the inevitable corrections and suggestions. But they were fewer than expected, and delivered with a different tone, more collaborative than commanding. I've always found that adding a touch of lemon zest brightens the flavors, she remarked, as I assembled a platter, offering the suggestion rather than imposing it. That's a good idea, I acknowledged, accepting the grater she handed me. Your platters always look so elegant. I'd love to learn how you arrange them. A flicker of pleasure crossed her face. It's all about balance and height. Here, let me show you a trick my mother taught me. For 2 hours we worked together in surprising harmony. Not without the occasional tension. Old habits die hard. but with a new willingness to accommodate each other's styles and preferences. By the time the rest of the family arrived, we had created a spread that combined Martha's classic elegance with some of my more contemporary touches. "So you two didn't kill each other," David whispered in amazement as he surveyed the appetizer table. "In fact, everything looks amazing." "Your mother knows what she's doing in the kitchen," I replied. "And apparently, so do I." The evening flowed with unexpected ease. Martha accepted compliments graciously, sharing credit for the food rather than claiming it all as her domain. When Michael raised a toast to Mom's perfect birthday dinner, she actually amended him. "Jessica and I prepared it together," she said, nodding in my direction. "She has quite the eye for presentation." Coming from Martha, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. As fall deepened toward winter, our interactions continued to evolve. Not without challenges. Martha's critical nature was deeply ingrained, and there were still moments when a careless comment would sting, when old insecurities would flare on both sides. But increasingly, these moments were followed by recognition, sometimes even an awkward apology. "That didn't come out as I intended," Martha said once, after making a pointed remark about my choice of decor for Thanksgiving. "What I meant to say was that it's different from my usual style, but quite lovely in its own way." The effort such statements cost her was evident in her slightly pained expression, but the fact that she made them at all represented a seismic shift in our relationship. December arrived, bringing with it the inevitable question: where would we spend Christmas? The previous year's disaster at our home hung in the air, unspoken but remembered. I was surprised when David broached the subject one evening as we decorated our tree. "Mom asked if we'd consider hosting Christmas Eve again this year," he said carefully, watching for my reaction. She promised to be on her best behavior. I paused in the act of hanging a delicate glass ornament. "She wants to come here after last year?" "She specifically mentioned how much the grandkids enjoyed our more relaxed atmosphere," David continued, "and she offered to bring her famous Yorkshire pudding to complement whatever menu you plan." The old me would have immediately begun planning an even more elaborate dinner than last year's, determined to prove myself once and for all. The new me considered the invitation thoughtfully. "I'd be open to hosting again," I said slowly, "but with some conditions." David nodded encouragingly. "Name them." "First, I'm not killing myself to create some magazine-worthy extravaganza this time. I'll make a nice dinner, a very nice dinner, but without the month of obsessive preparation. Sounds reasonable. Second, I want it to be truly collaborative. If Martha wants to bring Yorkshire pudding, wonderful. Emily can bring her sweet potato casserole. Michael's wife makes excellent pies. Everyone contributes. Everyone's effort is valued. I like where this is going. And third," I continued, "at the first sign that things are heading south, any comment about real restaurants or similar, we invoke the hydrangea code and take a breather. No suffering in silence this year." David grinned. "Agreed on all counts. I'll communicate the plan to Mom, diplomatically, of course." To my surprise, Martha accepted our terms without protest. "A potluck-style Christmas sounds lovely," she told David on the phone. "Less pressure on everyone." As Christmas Eve approached, I found myself remarkably calm. I planned a menu that was festive but manageable: prime rib, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, and accepted offers from family members to contribute their specialties. I decorated our home beautifully but not obsessively, focusing on warmth and comfort rather than perfection. The morning of Christmas Eve, Martha called me directly, a rare occurrence. "Jessica, I wondered if I might come by early to help with any preparations," she said, her tone carefully casual. "The Yorkshire pudding is best prepared fresh, and I thought perhaps you might appreciate an extra pair of hands." I hesitated only briefly. "That would be nice, Martha, thank you." When she arrived, bearing not only the ingredients for Yorkshire pudding, but also a lovely hostess gift, a set of hand-painted serving dishes I had admired months ago, I felt a wave of unexpected emotion. "These are beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. "Thank you." Martha nodded, a hint of self-consciousness in her smile. "I remembered you commenting on them when we visited that boutique in Provincetown. They seemed perfect for your entertaining style." As we worked together in the kitchen, Martha focusing on her contribution while offering occasional suggestions for mine, me accepting the input that made sense while confidently maintaining my own approach where it differed, I realized how far we had come in a year. The transformation wasn't complete, wasn't perfect. Martha was still Martha, opinionated, particular, accustomed to control. I was still myself, sensitive to criticism, protective of my domain, determined to be respected. But we had found a way to navigate our differences with greater understanding and, if not affection, at least genuine respect. When the family gathered that evening, the atmosphere was noticeably different from the previous year. Conversation flowed easily. Compliments were offered and accepted gracefully. Contributions were acknowledged. The meal itself was a delightful blend of traditions: Martha's classic Yorkshire pudding alongside my more contemporary sides, Emily's family recipe next to Michael's wife's innovative dessert. As we finished the main course, Martha set down her napkin and cleared her throat. The table quieted immediately. A year had changed much, but not the family's instinctive response to Martha commanding attention. "I'd like to say something," she began, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of emotion I rarely heard from her. "Last year at this table, I made a thoughtless comment that cast a shadow over a beautiful meal and a lovely evening." I felt David's hand find mine under the table as Martha continued. "This year I want to say clearly and publicly what should have been said then. Thank you, Jessica, for opening your home to us, for sharing your considerable talents, and for your patience with an old woman who sometimes speaks before she thinks." The table was silent, everyone frozen in a moment none of us had imagined possible a year ago. "The only thing better than a real restaurant," Martha concluded with the ghost of a smile, "is a real family, gathered together in love and acceptance, which is exactly what we have here tonight." She raised her glass in a toast, and one by one the family followed suit, culminating in a chorus of gentle agreement. Later, as guests departed with leftovers and warm hugs, Martha lingered behind helping with the final cleanup, despite my protests that it could wait until morning. "I meant what I said earlier," she told me as we worked side by side, storing food and rinsing plates. "This past year has been educational for me, challenging in many ways, but ultimately valuable. For me as well," I admitted. "I never expected we'd reach this point." Martha's smile held a wistfulness I hadn't seen before. "Life is full of unexpected turns, isn't it? Sometimes for the worse, but occasionally, if we're willing to grow, for the better." As she prepared to leave, bundling into her coat at the door, she paused. "I was thinking, perhaps next year we might try that new restaurant downtown for Christmas Eve, as a family, a new tradition perhaps." I laughed, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "That sounds perfect, Martha. A real restaurant it is." She squeezed my hand briefly before departing, a small gesture that spoke volumes about how far we had come and how far we might yet go. 5 years have passed since that fateful Christmas dinner, when Martha's cutting remark changed the course of our relationship forever. As I sit here in my kitchen, preparing for tonight's family gathering, I can't help but marvel at the journey we've traveled together. Martha is coming over this evening, not for a holiday or special occasion, just a regular Friday night dinner. These informal gatherings have become something of a tradition over the years, rotating between our homes, Emily's, and occasionally even Michael's when his wife insists. Martha still prefers to host at her house where she can maintain control of her environment, but she's learned to be a gracious guest as well. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks along the way, moments when old habits resurfaced, when sharp words were exchanged, when boundaries needed to be reinforced. Martha's therapist, Dr. Levine, became something of a family hero, though none of us would ever admit that to Martha's face. The woman who once dismissed therapy as indulgent navel-gazing now speaks casually about her sessions, occasionally sharing insights that have helped her understand her own behaviors better. "Dr. Levine says I have a tendency toward perfectionism that manifests as criticism of others," she announced during one family dinner, as matter-of-factly as if commenting on the weather. "Apparently, it's a defense mechanism." David nearly choked on his wine. "You don't say, Mum, but the most profound change hasn't been in Martha. It's been in me. I no longer measure my worth by her approval. I no longer exhaust myself trying to meet impossible standards. I've learned to take her occasional barbs in stride, to respond with humor or gentle correction rather than hurt and resentment. Most importantly, I've learned that standing up for myself doesn't have to mean constant conflict. It can simply mean being secure enough in my own value to not need external validation. Our Christmas tradition has evolved in the most unexpected way. Every other year we do indeed go to a real restaurant, a different one each time, selected through a family vote that sometimes becomes more contentious than the actual holiday ever was. On alternate years we host at our home, but with a twist. Martha and I plan the menu together, combining her traditional sensibilities with my more contemporary approach. These planning sessions, once unimaginable, have become opportunities for genuine connection, for sharing family stories and kitchen wisdom across generations. Last Christmas, as we collaborated on a particularly ambitious dessert, Martha surprised me with a revelation. "You know," she said, carefully piping decorative touches onto a Yule log cake, "my mother-in-law was a terror in the kitchen. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Every dish required her improvement. I swore I'd never be like her." The irony hung in the air between us. "And yet," she continued with a self-deprecating smile I never would have imagined on her face years ago, "Here we are, I agreed, passing her the gold dust for the final touches. "But I think we've broken the cycle, don't you?" She considered this, her hands steady as she applied the delicate gilding. "I believe we have, at least I hope so. Emily tells me you've been exceptionally welcoming to Michael's new girlfriend. It's not difficult. She's lovely." I hesitated before adding, "And I remember how it feels to be the outsider trying to find your place in an established family." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "I wasn't kind to you for many years." "No," I agreed simply. "You weren't. And yet, here you are, still part of this family, still putting up with an old woman's idiosyncrasies." I smiled at her choice of words. "Your idiosyncrasies nearly drove me to madness, but family is complicated, isn't it? Worth the effort, though." "Indeed." She stepped back to admire our creation. "Perfect. Or well, perfectly imperfect, as Dr. Levine would say. Those little inconsistencies in the pattern add character." From Martha, this was practically a philosophical revelation. The doorbell rings, interrupting my reminiscence. Martha is early, as usual, another habit she's unlikely to ever break. But as I move to welcome her, I find I'm genuinely pleased to see her, not bracing for criticism or steeling myself for battle. "Jessica," she greets me, offering her cheek for a kiss. "Something smells wonderful." "A new recipe," I tell her, taking her coat. "I thought we might try it together next time if you like it." Her eyes brighten at the invitation. "I'd enjoy that." As we move into the kitchen, falling into our now comfortable routine of preparation and conversation, I reflect on the most unexpected truth of all. In learning to stand up to Martha, I didn't lose a mother-in-law. I gained one. Not the doting, affectionate figure of storybooks, but a real woman with flaws and strengths, someone I've come to respect and, in my own way, to love. "You're smiling to yourself," Martha observes, raising an eyebrow. "Care to share the joke?" I hand her a glass of wine, clinking mine against it in a small toast. "I was just thinking about restaurants versus home cooking, how each has its place." "Indeed," she agrees, the ghost of our past conflict acknowledged in her knowing smile. "Though I must say, I've developed quite an appreciation for home cooking, in the right company." "To the right company, then," I offer, raising my glass again. "And to family," Martha adds, "perfectly imperfect as it should be." As the rest of our family begins to arrive, filling the house with chatter and laughter, I catch David watching his mother and me with a look of contented amazement. He still marvels sometimes at the transformation in our relationship, still expresses gratitude for my patience during the difficult years. But what he doesn't fully understand, what perhaps only Martha and I truly comprehend, is that our journey hasn't just been about tolerance or compromise. It's been about two strong-willed women learning to see and respect each other, to make space for different perspectives, to admit mistakes and grow from them. It's been about discovering that family isn't defined by perfect holiday meals or flawless performances of tradition, but by the willingness to navigate conflict with grace and emerge stronger on the other side. That Christmas dinner years ago, with its thoughtless remark about real restaurants, didn't break our family. In the end, it remade it, more authentic, more resilient, and infinitely more real than anything I could have imagined as I stood in my kitchen that December morning, planning the perfect meal for a woman who seemed impossible to please. Some might call it irony. I prefer to think of it as grace, the unexpected gift that sometimes emerges from our most painful moments, if only we have the courage to stand in our truth and the patience to allow transformation its slow, imperfect work.